witness a fireside chat among three old friends, reminiscing about the past and discussing contemporary critical events that have shaped the destiny of the country. At BluOne Ink, we are delighted and privileged to have been associated with Life of an Industani and the author Shiv Kunal Verma. We believe books open windows to the world and have the power to transform lives. BluOne Ink is an initiative to invoke, experience, share, and celebrate this power. To start the session, I would request Dr. Bibek Debroy to come on stage to inaugurate the session, please. Dr. Bibek Debroy was a member of the Niti Aayog. He has been awarded the Padma Shri and the Lifetime Achievement Award by the US Indian Business Summit. He's an Indian economist serving as the chairman of the Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister of India. So,
I am particularly thankful to the author and the publishers for not only having given me the opportunity of reading this book and for inviting me to this session, but also for adhering to my request of starting this a little bit early. I apologize in advance because I have somewhere to go to. So much as I would have liked, I cannot stay on for the entire session, and I apologize for this. Something has already been said about me in the introduction. From the introduction, it's obvious that I'm not that interested in the army. I'm not that interested in the defense forces. And under normal circumstances, I would probably not have read this book so soon after it had been published. I've met Shiv Kunal Verma for the first time. I'm delighted to have met him today. Normally, you tend to read books that have been written by friends and acquaintances, people that you know. Shiv Kunal Verma doesn't exactly qualify on that count. It's an autobiography, and it is a very, very candid autobiography. So candid that I'm sure once people have got around to reading the book, the publisher and the author will be slapped with defamation notices. I empathized with the author, not exactly identified, because his background is a completely different one. It's an army background. It's a Doon school brat kind of background. So it's not the background that I would identify with. But I empathize with what he was talking about because we are only slightly far apart in terms of our years of birth. So we went through the same turning points with different prisms, with different perspectives that India went through. In the blurb, General V.K. Singh, while describing the book, describes it or compares it to a machine gun, in the sense that one after another volleys keep coming at you. And that's the way the book actually starts. The book starts with 1984, incidents around 1984, and then it goes on. It's a very candid book. It's a very honest book that I said that earlier. It's a very disturbing book. It's a very disturbing book on two counts. So let me describe these two counts, not elaborate them because I don't have the time, and I hope you will read this book, which is a very, very thick book. By the way, the name Debroy is a very unusual name. It occurs only in certain parts of the country. And several years ago, whenever I met someone, particularly from the eastern parts, they invariably said, "Do you know X Debroy or do you know Y Debroy?" Because there used to be two famous Debroys. One of them was identified with Project Tiger, and the other one was a trade union leader who I'm sure Shiv Kunal Verma has never met in his life. So since he said since he has said several nice things about the Project Tiger Debroy, I cannot but like the book. But to come back to more serious things, in terms of turning points in the history of Indian independence, there are several things that are revealed that are not quite known. And therefore, apart from it being an autobiography, it also does a great deal of public service because it reveals things that are generally not known. They are hidden from the public eye. So let me quickly mention them. One of them is about independence and the partition of the country, and the way it was planned and thought of much before what we normally tend to think. There is a lot around 1962. Not being interested, particularly as I said, in the army, there were several disturbing things I learned about 1962, which are quite revealing. Ditto for 71. Ditto for the Sikh riots. Ditto for the Bhopal disaster. Ditto for an instance where there was a plan for India, or some parts of the government of India, there was a plan to vacate the Siachen Glacier in exchange for a certain quid pro quo. In each of these cases, there are revelations that should disturb all of us as citizens. I'm assuming they are true. Why should they not be? Particularly since there haven't been defamation notices. And in one of these cases, the incident about the Siachen Glacier, I tried to confirm whether it was true. So it was a bit like Kurosawa's Rashomon with a different lens, but the person I asked did not deny that that incident had happened. So one part of it is that. The other part is often when one is talking about government, as a countervailing pressure, one talks about civil society and within that the role of the media. There are several disturbing anecdotes and incidents about people who are fairly illustrious names in the media. And the author, before he moved on to other things, had spent some time working for media. So there are several names that you will immediately recognize. The established names in the media, their names we have read, we've read their columns. We continue to read some of their columns. Many of them are shown to have had feet of clay. So as broad trends, these are the two trends why I said this book is so very disturbing. There is a lot for anyone who's interested in wildlife, who's interested in films on wildlife. There is a lot in the book for anyone who's interested in defense, for anyone who's interested in the history of the army, the evolution of the army, the evolution and the history of the navy. Because Shiv Kunal's Verma's life has taken interesting turns and he's not stuck to one particular career. He's moved from one thing to another thing. It's a huge, fat, thick book. which means that it takes you time to read, because it is not the kind of book that you can finish on a flight, because it's a book that deserves to be read seriously, because despite it being an autobiography, despite it having a lot of stuff on dogs, literally, it also has a lot of stuff on dogs metaphorically, and we should all be concerned about how India, independent India, has been held to ransom by such people, and the fact that we generally do not know about it. So I congratulate Shiv Kunal Verma for having been so candid. Most autobiographies tend to pull their punches. This one doesn't. It doesn't pull its punches at all. And there's also stuff about a little bit about boxing also. And I congratulate the publishers also for having been courageous enough to publish this book. Thank you very much.
We shall start the event. The mic isn't working, but my voice is, I think, audible enough. Good. I would request now General Dr. Vijay Kumar Singh to please come on stage. General V.K. Singh, a former four-star general, served as the 24th Chief of Staff in the Indian Army 2010 to 2012. He has been awarded with Param Vishnu Seva Medal, Ati Vishisht Seva Medal, Yuddha Seva Medal, and Aide-de-Camp. He has been the Member of Parliament. Lok Sabha, representing the Ghaziabad constituency, Uttar Pradesh, since 2014. General V.K. Singh is currently the Honorable Union Minister of the State for Civil Aviation and Road Transport and Highways. I would request Anirudh Chakravartty to please present the bouquet to General V.K. Singh. Sorry, could you...
So, I haven't given you flowers before, but always a
You changed your mind. That was very vivid. We thought that we must give flowers.
After hearing Vivek, I've got to do a lot of, what should I say, hand out more than flowers.
I would now request Lieutenant General Rakesh Kumar Loomba to come on stage, please. Lieutenant General Rakesh Kumar Loomba is a graduate of the Masters of Science and Masters of Philosophy. He has been a colonel commandant of Skinner's Horse, the Deccan Horse, and the 86th Armored Regiment. The President of India has awarded him the Ati Vishisht Seva Medal and Param Vishisht Seva Medal for rendering services of an exceptionally high order. So, if you do us a favor again to present the task.
This one?
Well, sir, I need to again, I haven't given you flowers either. So.
Thank you, Kunal. You're always the first time.
I would now request the author himself, Shiv Kunal Verma, the author of Life of an Industani, to come on stage. A journalist, filmmaker, and a writer, he has authored some exceptional books that include The Northeast Trilogy, 1962's The War That Rose Up, and 1965, A Western Sunrise. Thank you for being here.
Oh, flowers.
We commence the Fireside Chat now. We have the Fireside Chat, which will be followed by a Q&A later on. During the Q&A session, we'll let you know this. It has started. To ask questions directly to the forum, you could press the button on the mic system, and you can press it off when you have asked the question. We'll now begin the Fireside Chat.
Ouch. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks a lot. I thought Anirudh is also going to be here. Is he coming on?
Yes.
Anirudh?
No, Kunal, you carry on.
There's no fire without the chat So so come on up. Please join us. There were the flowers for me? Okay. Here come the flowers. Well. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being here. It's nice to see a lot of familiar faces. And I know with the traffic conditions in Delhi, this is really, it takes a lot of effort to get here. And I thank you all from the bottom of my heart. We've just had the pleasure of listening to Dr. Bibek Debroy, and his program had to be slightly modified. He had to leave, so instead of 5 of us, you now have to do with 4 of us. Everybody's been introduced other than Anirudh. Anirudh is a very dear friend and a part of the BluOne group. We also have other people here from BluOne. And Anirudh has been, along with Pankaj, who's there, been the 2 people who have actually pushed this autobiography literally out of me by saying it has to be written. And we spent more time, I think, discussing it than actually writing it. But eventually, I think the fact that it's seen the light of day, I owe them both a huge thank you for the trust they have imposed in the whole project and the way the book has finally taken shape. General VK sir, what can I say? I did my initial practice of writing autobiographies with your book, and it was a real learning experience, and I think it made a lot of difference when I actually sat down to write my own. Now, General Loomba, you're next on the autobiography list, so we are looking forward to that as well. So let's start with General VK sir. You've been as much an integral part of my life as everybody else. Quite a few people here as well. And I hope you had time to see the book. At least I'm sure you read some of it because I've been sending you extracts along with some of my other close friends. So your views, sir.
First of all, let me say that book is a very readable book. Once you pick it up and you close it at a particular place where you get off the plane or a train or you switch off your lights to go to sleep, next day you want to actually start it. And that's something which is the quality of a book which ensures that the interest remains right till end. And it's a book which spans a fair time in the historical perspective. It goes over events, it goes over things which only a media person would see. A normal person probably would avoid and may not be there. So to that extent, you get a view from various angles altogether. And that's I found that's the beauty of the book, because it is not riveted to one particular angle. And of course, knowing Kunal, he is not riveted to one line, he is always pursuing many lines. There are events which are part of his research. There are events which he has seen, and there are views of his which have come out, which over a period of time he has solidified by whether he spoke about it or whether he wrote about it or he discussed about those. But certainly you will get a perspective which is different. You will get a perspective, I won't say disturbing, like Bibek said, because I think the very few people who get disturbed by too many things that have happened already, once the things have already gone past. Something new is only what is going to disturb you. But yes, there are things which will shake you up to the core as to why this particular thing happened. And there are scenes which is described which I would say a lot of media people, if they were brave enough to go out on a scooter and see, they would have seen. And some of us at that time who probably did likewise but were not writing have also seen. So uh, there's a lot of vividity, if I can put it that way, in the way things have been put down. Now, I'll only say this much and leave the rest.
Well, Anirudh, Mike, sir.
So I met Kunal about a year and a half back in Chandigarh, Punjab Bhavan. Me and Pankaj were there. And we got into the room, his room at about 10 o'clock in the morning, and we came out at, I think, 3 or 3:30 in the afternoon. I don't even remember if we had lunch. And by the end of those 5.5 hours, a couple of things had happened. One was the idea of pushing Kunal relentlessly to write this book, because as far as from where I stood, what I heard and what I saw, this story need to be told, and the rest of the country, especially this younger generation, needed to know what has what in my sense is contemporary history, part of our geopolitics, and for some, I mean, divine reason, Kunal seems to have popped up wherever there was either trouble or an inflection point in India's history. So therefore, I was very, very clear that this book had to be written. And for me, it was, and it still is, a very little autobiography. For me, it is a slice of Indian contemporary modern history, bridging military history, geopolitics, and so many other events that are so important to our country, as Professor Debroy just said. There are parts in this book which General Singh said that one doesn't get disturbed, but he's talking from a chief of the army staff perspective. He's seen so much, and people like us who haven't seen and who are basically civilians, they do get rattled. We get rattled by stuff that Kunal has written about what happened in Kargil, what happened in Siachen, what happened in Bhopal. What happened on 31st of October, on 1st November 1984, the description of what was going on, especially in the first few pages, just hooks you on. So I'm very happy that both me and Pankaj relentlessly went after Kunal to finish this book as early as possible, and we are very happy to see that this has seen the light of the day, and the country and the rest of the world also, to some extent, will get to read this book and will get to learn more about our country that I believe should have been out anyway. Thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, for those of us who know Kunal well, let me tell you, he's got a penchant for shooting from the hip, no holds barred, and that's always the case with him. He not only comes across as a person who says what he wants to, but he also does what he wants to. And for those of you who have gone through the book, it's a voluminous book. But the issue is that there are so many contemporary and issues in our recent past, which I'm sure at some time or the other have tickled all our imaginations. We all thought about why, how, what all happened. But I must say that his book is one. He may be wrong. That's a different issue. But he has all the guts, all the self-belief to put it down in writing very, very bluntly, and across the entire spectrum of either the government or the armed forces hierarchy, whether it's the Army, Navy, or Air Force, across the board. So when you asked me to come down here, I got this book about 5 days ago from my dear friend Anirudh. And since that time, it's only Kunal as far as I'm concerned. Because 555 pages is not a mean achievement in 4 to 5 days' time. I'm sure for those of us who will take the trouble of reading the book, at least those chapters which have always been an enigma to us, you'll find it extremely interesting and extremely rewarding. Thank you, Kunal.
Thank you very much, sir. Well, basically, and this is not a, this is, you know, when the whole discussion came up, let's write an autobiography, I frankly didn't want to do it. I mean, because it's not a reflection on your autobiography. I think most autobiographies are an ego trip. Either it's a story about how you've been wronged, or you were born in the wrong community, or yeah, I would have been this, that. Or it is a, you know, you got to be, you talk about somebody like Tendulkar or someone who's, or Ankur here. I mean, you know, he climbed every mountain under the sun. He has enough reason to write an autobiography. But I felt that, okay, this was a book that needed to be handled differently, though it comes under the larger umbrella of an autobiography. It is actually, I've tried to tell the story purely from the point of view of the events that happened. And as a filmmaker, I was perhaps fortunate that I got to record things on film. So I got to see a lot of what I had already experienced. For example, if I flew in a fighter sortie, I had it on film. And then we would watch it either on the Steenbecks while we were still on 16mm or on various video platforms. So when I started to actually go through the entire, my own records, etc., trying to put it all together, a lot of it just kind of fell into place mainly because of the kind of profession I'd been in, and which is recording and documenting most of the stuff. So, well, I had a great time writing it, but it is, I mean, you know, then again, you're talking about personalities, you're looking at things. There is, initially when we discussed it, I mean, you know, every book you show it to lawyers and stuff like that, and you look at possible cases of libel and stuff like that. But then at another level, why write if you don't want to, if you want to already sort of hedge your bets? I could have very easily written this book without actually talking about some of the events which unfolded where one was party in it directly or indirectly. But then that's what the story is all about. So one sort of put it across. And I think that's been the hallmark of my earlier books also, whether it's 1962 or Siachen or whatever. I've just tried to be as honest to the subject as possible and just put it out there and then see how it goes. A lot of the contemporary stuff is as Mr. Debroy said, some of it is enough to actually shake the country. And I think one of the issues which both the illustrious generals sitting next to me, General BK and General Loomba, were also party to this, was the Siachen sellout part of the whole book, where the previous government actually had decided to vacate Siachen and had actually taken certain steps. And in fact, the whole thing had to be countered in a certain way, which I've narrated in the book. So there's a lot that that we had to deal with, and I put it down. Let's see what kind of a reaction it eventually has. Then BK sir, your comments, especially around the Siachen sellout, because that was just after you had retired from the army, sir.
See what Kunal has written on Siachen and the trade-off is something which did figure in the papers for a little while, but I don't think not many people would have looked very deep into it. There has been some sort of a thinking in some quarters, fueled by I don't know who, to say, okay, well, it is a desolate area, nothing, why are we spending so much, etc., etc., and let's just leave it, and maybe the other side will also behave. However, they don't go into the psyche of the other side at all. The moment you vacate it, he'll come and sit down. And after that, all the sacrifices that have gone, all the people who ensured that you reach the ridgelines on the Saltoro range, would actually have gone waste. And to that extent, I think the very effective but subtle campaign that was mounted to ensure that it was revealed to people in a manner that there has to be a brakes on it, it succeeded. Uh, it's very interesting when some people are sent as part of a group, unofficial group, to talk to the another unofficial group from the other side, and they sort of do what the masters want. Okay, let's have a trade-off. It will be good for both the countries. Sounds very good. It sounds extremely good politics, if I can call it that way. सब कुछ ठीक होगा, आगे बढ़ेंगे, शांति होगा, all that. But what happens to the very reason why you went out there? What was it? That gets lost in it. So that way, Kunal has made a great contribution, if I can put it that way, which he doesn't really talk about it in the book, but it comes out when you read between the lines of how ultimately the whole proposal was stymied. The people who were into it were identified. They were targeted accordingly through the media and personal blogs and Twitter and Facebook. And Kunal was an enemy number one for everything. He has been, abused in the social media and all other things for doing such a thing. But if I can say, he did the country proud. He actually did the country proud because he was at the forefront of this campaign, which was launched to ensure that we do not lose what we have gained and on which we have a rightful claim.
It was touch and go, sir, but we were fortunate that once it did finally break out in the media, even something as powerful as the PMO, we didn't quite know what to do at that time because once the balloon burst, it burst. But I think General VK's stand at that time, he openly came out in the press and said that if Siachen is given away, it will be nothing short of treason. And that kind of thing really shook up Parliament and did a lot of things at that time. And it was as I said, it was touch and go because for a while, nobody was willing to touch it. And in fact, the Outlook magazine, after having run the proofs, withdrew it. I had a call from the PM. So, but the one question we asked at that time was, I think I had put out a map of Siachen and we said, all right, if we give this away, so be it, the Honorable Prime Minister so desires, let it be. But what will the new line of defense be? And that was a question which I don't think anybody could answer because if they had given away Siachen, then they would have had to actually fortify the Ladakh range, which divides Ladakh from the Shyok Valley. And while they talk about the costs around Siachen and stuff like that, it would have taken the equivalent of maybe 2 infantry divisions to hold that line, whereas right now we are holding it with just a brigade. So, well, General Loomba, sir, your perception on some of these issues, which are there also in the books.
Well, I'm not sure that all the members of the Track 2 who were looking at this issue of Siachen were actually aware of either the ramifications or even for that matter the strategic importance of Siachen itself. Because if you look at the strategic importance of Siachen, does not really look at the western side, look at the northern side, which is the more important side. And that is where the Karakoram Pass is and the proximity to the highway, etc. is there. So what is there to ensure that people don't move in and sit down? And at those heights, it's virtually impossible to evict them. Well, we do have in the audience General Puri, who was an architect of our, is there? He was an architect of our, one of the architects of our victory in the Kargil conflict. And he'll tell you as to how exceedingly difficult is for people to reach there. What to say to take action and to be able to capture those heights and capture those objectives. So I think it's a great service. It's a great service that Kunal did to the nation. And of course, VK sir was totally batting on the front foot and pushing it across. And I'm glad it was scuttled. In fact, take your mind back to half an hour ago when Mr. Debroy himself said that he spoke to one of the architects and he didn't get a favorable response, either favorable or unfavorable. That itself indicates to us as to the kind of shenanigans that were going on behind the scene as far as Siachen was concerned. But something which has been captured with so many lives having been lost, and not to worry about the financial part of it. Of course, it's a huge financial burden. But what happens to the lives which have gone behind a victory? So I'm glad it was not given away on a platter under some pretext or the other. Thank you, Kunal.
There's one more section in the book which is perhaps the only time where I've talked about something which is not directly involving me, where I've actually quoted from the earlier autobiography I'd helped write, which is General VK Singh's, where he was a major. And when the build-up to the planning, or rather, I won't even call it the planning, when the initial talk was going on about the attacking the Golden Temple, and he was that time in the DGMO, and I've actually taken the liberty of quoting that particular incident because I had been called to meet the army commander. They got me from Calcutta. I don't know why he got me there because the whole meeting probably lasted about 3 or 4 minutes. But what I've taken the liberty of quoting is that when the incident, because he was there along with General Somayasa, who was the DGMO, and the chief, Somana, and the army chief, General Vedya, when General Sundarji had arrived from Chandigarh, and literally overridden the army chief at that time, which completely created a lot of issues. It was pretty obvious to anyone that there was going to be a problem because the basic information simply did not exist. A little bit, sir, from your perspective about the 1984 the Blue Star operations.
84, of course, sorry. 84, the book starts with 84. And some of the things that he has described is what one did see in the streets of Delhi. Because I was living in area of, I don't know what it is called now, it is called Mayapuri Extension or something like that. It used to be called G8 area. And I was always very hesitant in giving that address to anybody because it was right in front of Tihar. So traveling from there every day to the MO, and specifically on that morning in 84, and after that number of days that things were there, very rightly, it was all, they were, I think, the way everything was done, it was well planned at the, whosoever was the political master at that time. Planned, executed, they did not allow the army to move in for 3 days into Delhi. I remember having, we used to sit the whole night in the ops room and try to monitor what was happening. And it used to be painful because had the army moved in, things would have been different. Wherever the army moved in, things became all right. And the brashness was so much. I still recall somebody, since our number was available, somebody ringing up. There's no patrolling in front of my house. I said, "Who are you?" And he gave some name. I said, "Army doesn't do it." So he said, "What? I'll complain against you." I said, "This is my name. You can complain. Go ahead. Army is not coming to you. We've got many more things to do." But that was the type of thing. Everything was out of control, and it took the army quite some time to do things. It was a very painful period, a disturbing period. It was. We had our own hassles of protecting our own men who were moving from one place to another, moving in trains. They were lynched. It's a period which doesn't go out of your mind at all. And of course, the explanation has always been that when a tree falls, well, it falls. But something that should never have happened, and I think it was controllable, very well controllable. And I'll go a step further to say that had the then Prime Minister listened to the sane advice of a decorated army chief who was there and not got carried away by the more eloquent speaking general, things may have been different.
General Loomba, so you were in, I think, a BM at 102 Brigade at that time, or 106?
104.
104, which is in Tangdar. And he probably has a lot of, because he had, I think, out of 4 battalions.
The two of us, when in the run up to writing the book, the two of us were discussing the mutinies that took place consequent to the 6th of June. And so the incident he's quoting is what I told him, that I was a brigade major. Brigade major is a person who looks after operations of intelligence of a brigade headquarters. You would know a brigade quarter comprises of 3 battalions, 3 to 4 battalions, but we were in Tangdar, which is about 5 hours drive from Srinagar. It's a bowl and runs along the Kishan Ganga. The brigade had 4 major units, and out of that, 3 were Sikh regiments out of the 4. Yet we didn't have any problem. There was deployment on the borders. Then there was a number of speaking to men. There were teams that were sent across to the Golden Temple. So what actually would become disturbing today is something which has to be thought of. Is in those days, there was a virtual vacuum of information. Not virtual, quite a lot. In fact, I always give this example. My wife was to come and join me in Tangdar, and I was to drive down the next day to pick her up, to collect her from the airport in Srinagar, when I got a call in the evening. And the exchange told me, "Sir, your wife on the line. There is somebody from Chandimandir who will relay. Then there's somebody from Srinagar who will also pass the message on. Somebody from Baramulla who will relay it on to you till you get the message." It was quite hilarious because it was, "Hello, darling, hello, darling, hello, darling, hello, darling." But those were the days. Today, the situation is totally different. At the drop of a hat, you have fake news coming in. At the drop of a hat, with communication explosion having taken place. Now, what will happen in that kind of a scenario is something that people who are in power today have to look at it and have to think about it, because fake news is totally ruling the roost. So, well, that was a very trying period, both post storming of the Golden Temple and, of course, post assassination of Prime Minister. Thanks, Kunal.
Can't resist it, sir. You're the government, the people in power today. How do you deal with this whole menace? Because you've also been a victim of the media actually having, especially around the time of the whole, while you were the chief. But how do we really deal with the situation today? For example, what's happening with China on the Ladakh front, etc. There's so much which is, nobody really knows anymore what is actually happening. So how do you actually reach out? How do you, because people then start talking, 90% of the time you got a counter narrative for everything.
Let me. There's a book called The Whale of Kashmir. I think it was written almost 150 years back. The writer was Lawrence, who was the commissioner out there, and he written everything about the flora, fauna, people. And mind you, when you read it today, it's almost the same. What is described of, don't mind digressing, right? Whatever is there. And one thing which he speaks of is when he comes to people. He says, people in Kashmir love to hear and love to pass on rumors. That's why they've got so many windows in their house. It is true. I think we also have too many windows in our houses. We will love to believe what has come on that WhatsApp or what somebody has passed on. Whether it is right or wrong, nobody is bothered. The moment you see it, the first thing that happens in the group is, let me pass it on to people. Thank God today you can only pass it on to 5 first. After that you will do it again. It takes a little more time. But there was a time when you could do it to n number of people. The whole broadcast would take place. This communication explosion can only be curtailed by our own understanding of it. And it is right down. Today you go to a village, everybody is holding a smartphone, everybody is on Facebook, their own Facebook. You come to my constituency, there are 100 or more news channels on YouTube. There are papers which are on PDF. It doesn't cost anything. So he's got and all of them are competing with each other. Either they are passing on fake news or they are trying to blackmail somebody. Very few of them who actually pass correct news. The situation is pretty bad. And good that we are, like if you take your minds back to good old days, when somebody said, this has happened because it came in the newspaper. Today, it has happened because the God's gospel, the WhatsApp has spoken. That's the problem. And it has today become a medium to be made use of by adversaries. It has become medium to be made use of by anybody whom you can think of. It'll take time to educate people not to fall into this trap. But that education, I feel, will take a lot of effort. And more the technological means come in, more and more people will fall into this trap. It's a difficult situation.
Well, the General Loomba said, hello darling, hello darling, hello darling. You're sure getting a lot of hello darlings these days on social media, so you've got to be very careful. But here's one gentleman who's hello darling in Kashmir. So, what's your perspective of...
I'm not going to talk about Kashmir right now because I would like General Singh to throw some light on the chapter where he describes Op Blue Star, sir. He, in his conversation, he has not said it in so many words in the book, but in our conversation, he said that it was a fairly botched up operation, the Blue Star, in so many words. So, I mean, from a uniformed officer, and that to Rajput, if I'm not mistaken. So, how would you respond to his assertion that it was a completely botched up operation? 84 Blue Star.
I've already said so. I think I'm not taking names. I said that had the then Prime Minister had the thing to listen to a chief who was decorated, who probably was going to give a rightful advice and made an attempt, but she got carried away by a more eloquent general. That's it. Things went wrong thereafter. Everything went wrong.
Now, would you like to elaborate on that, what General Sahib is not saying?
No, he's saying enough actually in that one sentence actually. And I've also basically just said that it was a botched up operation because I mean there was without intelligence. I mean you really can't even start to plan something like what had happened. And there was
Remember the incidents of number of machine guns, LMGs.
see I was with India today, so my first time I went into the Golden Temple, I tagged along with a gentleman who's now one of our greatest advocates of false. I'm sounding like Trump here, but false media. I mean Shekhar Gupta, and he was the guy who was assigned. He used to go and meet Bhindarwale pretty often, so I tagged along with him. And I got separated in the crowd. I mean, so I landed up, suddenly came face to face with Bhindarwale. He had an arrow in his hand. And his intelligence seemed to be better than the army's intelligence because he looked at me and he said, Tera pyo fauji hai. And my dad was Brigadier in 11 Corps at that time. And then he pulls out this pistol and he cocks it. And he said, let's see how brave you are. And he puts this thing in my mouth and he presses the trigger. I knew the weapon wasn't cocked because it makes a slightly different sound when it's got around in the chamber. So I didn't flinch. So he thought I was like, brave boy and all that kind of rubbish. But I met him once or twice. So then after that, I had pushed off to Assam. And my dad actually called up and said, where the hell are you? Because for about a month or so, I was in Assam just shooting wildlife with a friend of mine. And the government of India actually went really out of the way to get me to Chandigarh. It was raining like hell. I was with a friend of mine, Brinda Datta. She was, her dad was Butch Datta, who was one of the leading tea garden guys. And we had been all over the place, taking photographs, visiting Manas and Ramdaf, Arunachal, Nagaland, everything. And they actually landed this A300 because it was almost 3 feet of water that day in Calcutta. And I was told, get onto this plane. And the A300 used to be a huge aircraft. So I had 12 air hostesses, just me as one passenger, and we took off. We landed in Delhi and somehow got to Chandigarh. And there I ran into General Ramu Gaur, who said, listen, just be damn careful because the army commander is also your father's boss. So I said, yes, sir. And I was taken to his house. And after about, he just appeared and he said, all right, what's there? Firstly, he seemed very disappointed that I actually hadn't been there for a month and a half. I told him, I said, I don't know, I was in Assam. So, but he said, okay, what did you see? So I being an army brat, as Debroy said, Mr. Debroy said, I started rattling off numbers. I said, so they've got LMGs, they've got this, they've got this. In fact, I gave him very specific numbers. I told him there's 64 LMGs that I counted. And he looked at me and said, you're a journalist, you exaggerate. And he lost interest in me. And he was gone. I was wondering why get me here, if you're not really interested in what I've got to say. But my dad again spoke to me when I went into the guest room and said, I hope you haven't, meri naukri hai na? Maine kaha, haan, pata tak to nahi malum. So when the attack happened, I think there was this element of, we'll just turn up there in force. And these guys will just panic and come out. That seemed to be the entire underlining thing. And even the events as they unfolded, the use of tanks later that night, after everything got botched up, everything, it just indicates that there just wasn't enough intelligence. So, I mean, that's as far as Blue Star was concerned. But General Loomba here has been DGMI intelligence. I mean, he's been the chief spook, as they say. And when he was DGMI, I remember one interesting thing. I visited him in his office one day and he said, "Ye mera computer screen hai, aur ye Pakistani DGMI computer screen hai." And every time he says hello, darling, to his Begum on the other side, he says, I'm watching the whole thing. So, a little bit from you, sir, about Punjab in those days and especially, Skinner's horse being also one of most of the armored corps regiments have always been revolving around Punjab in any case. So, your comments on Blue Stars?
Well, I'm not sure whether many of us here have read Kunal's description, the chapter on Blue Star. And I think it's extremely illuminating, if I may use that word. Also, he has quoted this conversation that he was talking about, wherein, the Prime Minister was asking the chief, and the chief was not recommending that, people go in, and yet you had somebody full of bluster who came in and said, go in. Well, personalities and names are not important. What is important is that these things can happen. And there has to be institutional checks and balances to ensure that they don't happen. Because if, one person with sheer bluster can start changing things around, then I won't take names, not important, like I said, but it's there in the book. Kunal has not withheld any punches at all as far as that issue is concerned. Aftermath was quite bad. There again, Kunal has once again mentioned when he talks of consequences of assassination of Mrs. Gandhi about this, Sir also just mentioned that when a large tree falls, the earth shakes. Now that exactly what Kunal said is what is right, that amounted to a kind of exoneration of people who were involved in perpetuating that crime. When the Prime Minister of the country makes a statement to say what he said, that is prima facie letting everybody else off the hook. We already know that there's nobody who has been in the hook now and has been good 40 years. So it's a long time. Well, as long as nation learns and there are institutional checks and balances, I think it would have done us good.
Well, yeah, the other interesting part was the after Mrs. Gandhi's assassination, and I got that initial list from Associated Press, which actually spelled out what was going to happen in Trilokpuri. That's all documented in the book. In fact, it starts with that. What was the subsequent thing? I think on the 5th of November, when Dilip Ganguly and myself, we flew into Amritsar. And that was the scariest flight I've ever done in my life. I've done a lot of flying, but I've never been as scared. And in fact, the only thing that saved me was that Dilip Ganguly was even more scared than I was. So relative terms, I was at least looking brave. Everybody on that flight with us had been battered. It was the most shocking thing I'd ever seen. And you can make out, because they just cut their hair. They were all bandaged, this, that. And then that interview with Sahib Singh in the Golden Temple. It was, I never knew I could speak Punjabi. My grandmother, my mom's mom, always spoke to me in Punjabi, but I never actually conversed with her in Punjabi. And there was Sahib Singh, the chief granthi of the Panch Pyaras, the Golden Temple. And as we got there, I had this Sennheiser mic and this tape recorder, and he said, I want to make a statement. And he spoke in Punjabi, and I had to speak to him. So I also, spoke to him. And then he made the most chilling statement I've ever heard in my life, because it was actually a call. He said, it was a call to all Sikhs across. He said, whether you're in Canada, whether you're in Germany, whether you're in USA, the Sikhs have been butchered in Delhi, we have to now rise, kill everybody. I mean, it was virtually a diktat. Now, I was already in trouble because I had once or twice in the past also. As a journalist, you're not supposed to take sides. I mean, you're just supposed to report what is going on. Even the Trilokpuri thing, I had stolen the papers from AP eventually, and nothing happened. Is a different matter. But so, in fact, somebody on Twitter, I think, has pointed out, he's asked this question because this part was quoted in one of the extracts, and he said, "Well, why did you ring up from Sahib Singh's phone?" Well, firstly, there was a phone there. And in those days, we didn't have cell phones. We had communication was a real problem. I mean, if you had to ring up somebody, it was a nightmare. Or 1984, we had those phones, dial and all that. And amazingly, I actually picked up the phone. I rang up the Army Exchange. I remembered the Army Exchange number. And that in itself was a bit of a miracle that I got it right. What was a bigger miracle was that the exchange put me through to the GOC, which was Chicky Dewan. Then so वो पूछते हैं GOC साहब से बात करना है, अच्छा strength 5, strength 4. I said yes. So somehow my voice must have had that urgency, and he just put me through. And I told the general, I said, "Sir, I've got this tape. I'm going back to Mohan International. I have no choice but to transmit it from there. Once it goes to Delhi, it's out of my control." So he said, "All right." And I said, he says, "I'll get the cops to meet you." I said, "Fine." Because if somebody sees me handing, I can't hand it over just like that. So, and there was this gentleman, he was the SP there, a chap called Sheetal Das. He used to wear his pistols the other way around with white. He thought he was Patton. In fact, he unfortunately was later killed by one of his own informers who grabbed his pistol and shot him a few days later. Punjab was that whole period was unbelievable. I mean, it was just like, it was like something happening almost by the minute. It was crazy stuff. And these guys were waiting for us in the hotel when we got there. And well, I was the one who had told them, "Bhaiya, thoda sa thapad wapad maar ke le lena." But Sheetal Das gave us the 3rd degree, and my God, it was painful business. I was spitting out teeth for a few days after that. But yeah, we had to do what we had to do because, I mean, but I think that kind of sealed it for me because as a journalist, I wasn't going to continue because I had done this more than once. And the worst part was my chief of bureau, who I absolutely adored because she gave me a free hand in AP. She said, "You want to do wildlife stories, you want to do whatever you want, go do it." But she also kept telling me, she said, "Listen, you got to decide. Are you a journalist or you want to be, some sort of play your own games? You can't play those games." I mean, Chaube is here. He knows what it means. Very often you have information what do you do? So, but what finally brought the curtain down on my journalistic career was actually Bhopal. Because when I got in there, I think I was among the first few guys to get in there. And then again, this whole thing that while we were flying to Bhopal, the flight used to go, those days used to go via Gwalior. So we landed at Gwalior where Denzil Keeler was that time commanding the air base. And 84 was a very interesting year. Everything was happening in 84. And, on that leg, Dilip was again with me and I told him, I said, "Look, last time I went to Kana and I started talking about wild dogs or dholes and how dangerous they are and how they can even kill a tiger." So after, all the gruesomeness of Bhopal and having seen all the dead bodies and the entire thing, I come back in the evening with just one thought in my mind. I dismissed my gadi and I had this hotel which was overlooking the railway station. You could see the railway lines glinting in the night. And all I wanted to do was have a bath and just hit the sack. But the lady at the counter said, "There's a telegram for you." Those pink telegrams of those days, which used to have those strips of things which should be glued to it. And it was a telegram from my chief of bureau. And she said, "What the hell are you doing?" It said, "From Chief of Bureau Delhi to APC Bhopal." What the something hell are you doing in Bhopal? Because everybody else is reporting wild dogs from Kana eating dead bodies. And I just couldn't believe it because Kana is 500 kilometers from Bhopal. Ye kahan se aa gaya? But the penny dropped. So luckily my car was still reversing. I stopped him, got into it, went there, accosted the guys and said, "What the hell are you guys doing?" And so finally the compromise ki nahi, ab chala story chali gayi hai, chalo koi baat nahi, we'll say stray dogs from Bhopal. I said, "Stray dogs bichare sabse pehle mare the yaar. Their bodies are lying there with the people. What are you guys doing?" And that was one incident in Bhopal. And then again, there was this whole thing of this French journalist who went and slapped this woman to just get shots of her crying. I said, "Yeah, enough." And so first chance I got was Project Tiger, and I opted out. Started shooting films after that, which wildlife was a lot more civilized than human beings. That was the bottom line eventually. So,
Kunal's mentioning of this incident of the tape and the call that he made to the GOC in Amritsar. Well, let me tell you that he has a penchant for living dangerously. Razor's edge. If you read the book carefully, you'll find that there are two incidents that he has mentioned. One is over 3 days, and scene 1 talks of the fact that he went down and he actually filmed Hizbul Mujahideen in Srinagar and the areas around it. He admits in the book, thank God, that it was a very dangerous thing to do. And the second is the fact when he was abducted by the Ulfa in Assam. So please take it, or what he says about this living dangerously with a pinch of salt. Some people are, genetically tuned to living in such a fashion. Kunal, what about your days with the Hizbul Mujahideen?
So that was kind of crazy. I didn't say I was living dangerously. I said I was living stupidly because I don't know what made me do that. I was shooting with the army. It was, I think, one of the worst winters we'd had in 94, 95. My elder daughter was just born. I hadn't even seen her. And I was in the valley because Dipti was still in Bombay with Valika, and I was coming to a close. We were involved in firefights. In fact, General V.K. Singh himself commanded Victor Force, so he knows exactly what we're talking about here. And then the Corps commander, or was it the Chief of Staff? So with the Corps commander, I'm forgetting his name, I think General Akera or something. So he knew my dad very well. So I get a message through 10 BR, who had lost their CO. I was involved in that particular firefight also. And he says, we've got this, you're very excited. He says, there's this guy, he's the army commander, the Hizbul Mujahideen army commander, he's willing to surrender. And you got an Associated Press card, BBC card. He said, you got it mixed up. He said, you got a card, your credentials, go across here. Before he surrenders, that guy, if you get some good footage, nothing like it. Oh, yes sir, I'll go. Something really. Having said that, I was with a RR battalion, Colonel Jambal. I rang him up the other day just to cross-check the facts. And we spent the whole afternoon eating wild boar pickle and drinking whiskey. And with every drink, he said, "Tere baap ko kya bolunga, wo bar jayega, mat ja. Will you please shut up? As it is, I'm like kind of, having heart attacks here. He was scaring me even more. So when he finally went, it was a place called Sambal village. And I remember snow piled up and very cold, 2 a.m. And I got out of his jonga. Looking at this red light of the mic reminds me of that, because even then he said, I wore a Firan on top. I had these snow boots and this stuff. And I had cameras stuck everywhere, and batteries were a big problem in those days. So he said, okay, last chance, get back in. I said, no, sir. Now just go. So he drove forward, and then he stepped on his brakes. So these 2 red lights came on in that dark, and it really kind of dazzled me. Pulled back, leans across, and he gives me a pistol. It was a Beretta. And he said, it's a captured weapon. If you go down fighting. And he gave me 2 magazines. And he drove off. He was standing in the blooming dark with a pistol and 2 magazines, with no place actually to shove it. As it is, I'm a fat fellow. Where the hell do I put it? I wasn't as big as I probably am now, but even then it was a problem. So anyway, I put that in, and then I said, how do I know this pistol is not loaded? And pitch dark. I kind of opened it, I put my finger, I realized, okay, the chamber doesn't have a round, thank God. I don't want to shoot myself, in the worst possible place. And then I just sat there on that milestone. And seconds kind of ticked away, and I must have been there for at least a couple of hours. Nothing seemed to be happening. And then suddenly somebody put a bag on my head. And Pehle to I was being, I read a lot of these books. When they capture you like this, what do? So I started counting 45 steps to the left, 3 steps to the left. After 2 minutes, all that was out of the window. But I think we were moving around in the same area because the ambient sounds were more or less the same. We finally landed up in this room. And that's when they took this hood off. And by that time, it was broad daylight. And there was this guy kneeling like this in one corner on the right-hand side. I was on the left. I had this guy sitting next to me called Peer. Everybody was calling him Peer Saab. And he was the main spokesperson. And there were a whole lot of other guys. Everybody was armed. And there was this very pretty girl serving us tea. And I was introduced to these guys. And why are you laughing, sir? It was terrifying stuff. I remember the girl very well.
You remember the 12 werewolves
and then this guy was introduced. And he had that pockmark kind of face. He had 3 teeth. And they were all absolutely yellow. And he was introduced to me and they said, इनसे मिलिए, इनका नाम साहिबुद्दीन है या something like that. इन्होंने 82 औरतों का बलात्कार किया है और 3 आर्मी के हेडशॉट किए. I was like, what? And so I asked very reverently, I said, can I film this introduction? He said, go ahead. So I said, all right. So I put out the tripod. It had a lightweight tripod. And when I started leaning down and fitting the camera onto that, everybody's waiting to repeat this 82 balatkar and whatever. And this stupid pistol fell out onto the ground. So like a duck, I sat down, Firan the good things that way. And groped around for it, found it, shoved it back in. Again, it fell down, 2 bari giri. And all this time I was trying to do this thing. Then this guy finally, so he repeated it, I filmed it. And then again, this pistol fell or whatever, I don't know what was going on. And then this peer says to me, he says, Kunal sahab, wo pistol nikal ke aap side mein kyun nahi rakh dete? So I said, how long did you know I was up? It turned out that they were actually watching us with image intensifiers right from the entire thing. And those 5 days I spent with those guys, it was crazy stuff. They had far superior communication sets than we did. In the army, it was crazy. We were using those army sets. Oh, Balbir, padi pe chadha, and like you said, hello darling. So in fact, the Bazipura incident got changed. From Bandipura, we sent reinforcements to Bazipura. Because, you're communicating from one to the other, it becomes a problem. It was crazy stuff. And, again, misinformation, information, whatever you want to call it. There was that moment in the mosque where this peer was holding forth about how the Hukumat had done this, Hukumat had done that. Mere se chup nahi raha gaya. I said, can I have the mic? Pakda diya. And I then started telling the crowd, I said, listen, whoever was there, their congregation, I said, look, this is not true. This guy's lying to you. So what happened? And I gave them a fairly vivid description of what had happened in Baramulla. And I said, this is what the whole thing is. And the thing was, the entire attitude changed, from they were nodding away with this guy, and now they were nodding away with me also after a while. So when we were leaving, I still remember that old man. He pulled my firan and he said, हम क्या करें जनाब, सबके हाथ में एक ही है, चाहे फौज होए चाहे ये होए, हम तो चारों तरफ से मार खा रहे हैं. And this was one question I was asked very often. What is the difference between Punjab and Kashmir from my perspective or whatever I had seen? And this is one thing I've always answered quite bluntly, that in Punjab, if you see, half the time these guys are youngsters, okay? They're not driven by religion, they're not driven by anything, it's just the power of a gun. And what are they looking at? They're looking at the kind of stature they get and everything, and it's also the women. When every time they try to abduct a woman in Punjab, they would have to kill the guy. Because that guy would stand up and fight. In Kashmir, they used to just sit there and whimper. And I used to tell these people, why aren't you fighting? I said, no, they are hamare liye jihad ladne. This completely turned around the entire thing on its head. And I think to some extent, the ills of social media apart, I think it is also beginning to perhaps also help steady the situation a little bit, because now people are aware in the remote parts of Kashmir and everything else that there is a counter narrative also. They may not believe it, or they may not come out openly, but the fact is that that kind of blind किसी ने बोला कि चल पड़ो तो चल पड़े kind of a thing थोड़ा सा कम हो रहा है, in my opinion. So your comments on Kashmir.
Let me take you back to Whale of Kashmir. It also says that Kashmiris respect a person with strength. The moment they feel the person is not strong enough or he turns his back, they'll abuse the hell out of him, which is true. And that's why they couldn't care less. So far as the person who's holding a gun and power, they'll do everything. And if you were being nice, probably it will be taken as a weakness. So it's a what Kunal is saying is something which is right. We came to grips with the thing in 90s when things actually were very bad. It has taken us a lot of time to come to a level where we've got an upper hand. Today we talk of in the number of actual terrorists as X, and maybe it was far more at that time. The only thing is that we are winning against the terrorists, but I'm not very sure we are winning against terrorism. And that's something to think about. And that is where what Kunal is saying comes into play. What is the narrative that we are putting across? What is it supporting that narrative? How is it being received? What actually is happening? You will hear a lot of people who would tell you, "Sir, this has happened with us. They have abducted so and so. They have done this. They have done that." No resistance. No resistance at all. They'll just tell you everything. And yet, you still have people who retain their sanity out there. There were times when I was in Victor Falls that I've gone to somebody's house in Lal Chowk to have kahwa made in milk, not the other kahwa, because he said nothing will happen to you. You can come. I said okay. So me and my wife, we went out there, and in Lal Chowk we sat and quietly came back without telling anybody. If I had told somebody, I would have been in trouble. Today I can talk about it. But the fact is, fighting terrorism is an arduous task. It entails large number of areas which must receive equal attention. It is not just the hard part, but there's a great amount of soft skills and soft part that is required to tackle it. And to that extent, unfortunately, what happens is that every time some people change, from a particular appointment in the government or in the army or in the police, everybody tries to reinvent the whole thing. And that is how things go wrong. And that's why it is continued. And a lot of people have stake in it for its continuation. They're very happy. It makes things better for them. I mean, if an ordinary sanitary inspector can construct a house costing about 20 lakhs, I think we need to think about it, what actually is going on. Even in the worst of days, Srinagar was growing. The building activity in Srinagar was tremendous. There's nobody poor out there. Poor live in Jammu province, not in the valley. So it's a thing which needs to be looked at very deeply, and you need to tackle things differently. And the day you start tackling it differently, things become different. People out there believe what has been passed on from the other side, and every day being fed to them that, look here, Baramulla was, we were the, law-abiding, trusting in God. We didn't do anything. It is the Indian Army which did all this, and now they're blaming us. Now, how do you turn this narrative? And once it carries on for a certain period of time, it sticks in the brain. They say, nahi, aap galat bol rahe.
Well, one narrative that we did, and again, when I use the word we, again, General Loomba, General VK. General VK was the Eastern Army commander that time. General Loomba was commanding 3 Corps. I think I let General Loomba take that because the first meeting on the coffee table book started with him saying, I don't want a book which is showing me or my army commander. And I said, you bet, sir, we're not going to do it. So we actually, the whole Northeast trilogy was born from that. And in fact, I think it played a very major role in changing the narrative and the perspective of people in the Northeast. It was 5 years of shooting eventually. So we'll take it from Northeast Palette.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I was General V.K. Singh's co-commander. He was my army commander. I was also his intelligence chief. When I went to the Northeast, very interesting episode took place. After about a month of my being there, my mother suddenly rang me up and said, Beta, I want to come over. I said, Jarur aao. So we fixed up everything else, ticketing and everything else was worked out. And this was already in the month of October. And coming closer to the date, she kept asking me. She said, garam kapde lane ne? Acha, shawl ki nahi leke aama? I hope everybody understands Punjabi. Let's just carry it on. Finally, I asked her, I said, what is bothering you? Problem ki hai ji? She said, beta, main puchna sikha, passport leke aana nahi leke aana. Well, I'm sorry to say, she was a doctor from 1945. That only goes to prove as to how much knowledge do people in the balance of the country have about our Northeast. Very, very poor. There are some friends of mine who asked me before coming there, yaar, Guriyat nahi chal rahi. I mean, which world are we living in? No knowledge, virtually no knowledge, or very little knowledge of matters of Northeast. And it's a tribute to the sagacity of Kunal, and of course, the very large-heartedness of General V.K. Singh, that 2 excellent books came out. One was the Northeast Palette, and the second, of course, was the Northeast Trilogy. Northeast Trilogy, for those of you who may have had the opportunity of going through it, speaks of the entire Northeast. Entire Northeast. And by the way, there is no self-aggrandizement at all. You will not find a photograph of General V.K. Singh. You will not find my photograph. I think Kunal's photograph has to be there because he is the author. Otherwise, you will find nothing at all. But you will find only information about the people, the tribes. I was myself amazed, being an army man, having been in the Northeast earlier, I was myself amazed that Nagaland had 26 major tribes. So the book has all that is required for what he calls now as, it was alternate education, but now I think it's a very mandatory education which is required for the people of the balance of the country. That's all that I had, Kunal, in this. Sir, would like to add something?
Northeast trilogy, I'm not your baby, sir. Kuch to bolo.
The book was born by the passion that Kunal exhibited about Northeast, and we're supporting it because we thought that it is very important that the culture, the tribes, the flora, the fauna, everything about Northeast comes out in easy to see and easy to understand format. Something which is more pictorial. People do look at photographs, and since he keeps saying, talking about beautiful people, I think he has photographed a lot of beautiful people in that. The covers are absolutely out of the world for whatever has been depicted in the books. The only thing is that you can make very good books, It was very difficult to persuade people to buy them. Very difficult. And especially if you tell them, well, you'll learn something about the Northeast, they say, "Jana hi nahi hai, to kya padhna hai?" It's a very awkward thing, but something which we did give to a lot of people. Everybody liked it. We tried to persuade the chief ministers in the Northeast when I was looking after the donor ministry for some time, for about 6 months. The response was very good. They loved the hamper with the books that we gave them. After that, there was no response. Because somewhere I think we've got a system. It is systemic fault. Where will it come from? Who will buy it? Where will this money come? Go? How can we show it this way? People don't look at how to find an answer to it. They're quite happy. Not in my time. Let somebody else do it. But I think had it proliferated at that time, it would have made a lot of difference in understanding. We in the army have been calling Mokokchung as the Paris of the East. I think General Puri sir would agree with me. And you know that they celebrate a son-in-law festival every year. And most of the son-in-laws are not from Nagaland. They're not from Nagaland, they're from outside Nagaland, from the mainland. So it's and if maybe you would have had more son-in-law and daughter-in-law festivals had people understood the type of culture that prevails out there.
Well, I think there are quite a few people here who've been very much a part of the journey of this book. I have my classmates here. Thanks for coming. That first of all, you guys are the Dun School sections, of course, are there. General Puri sir, we filmed the Kargil War. I think the first person I walked into his headquarters was General Puri. In fact, his Jivan was giving me a tough time. I didn't have any papers, nothing. So he said, "Tum kaun ho? Baith jao yahan pe." I was about to arrest me. So I think the general had gone for a walk and he came back in it. I still remember, sir, you were in a tracksuit. And he kind of looked at me and said, "Oh, hello, Kunal, how are you?" So the Jivan suddenly from her handcuffs was give me a cup of tea. Yeah, suddenly the whole thing changed. Well, we've got Mr. Darshan Singh here. And I have to mention the amount of work we've done in taking military history to schools. He's been instrumental in helping us in actually doing that. And he had the vision to make it a calendar. It's now a major calendar event for all schools, and people are coming from all across the subcontinent to attend it. We've actually created something quite seminal as far as military history in schools is concerned. And so thank you for believing in me and giving me all that support. We are now also taking the Northeast trilogy. We are expanding it. We are going even further. We are going into South India also. We got 4 wildlife books. And we are looking at Trans-Himalayan regions. We are looking at an illustrated military history. And we are putting this as a value education program. And again, the BluOne group is instrumental. Getting people to buy it, as you said, is a major challenge. But we are getting some very, very good responses. And hopefully we will be able to impact the education system in India as well. So let me now open it up to the audience. Anybody have any particular questions? Please shoot. We'll be happy to answer them.
How did you choose the name? It's kind of unique. Nutan Sharma from the print. The name Industani.
बहुत सारे हिंदुस्तानी हैं, बहुत सारे पाकिस्तानी हैं, काफी सारे खालिस्तानी भी हैं, पर सोचा कि चलो एक हिंदुस्तानी भी खड़ा कर दें.
Hindustani and Indian, right?
We are from the Indus Valley, and though I'm born in Dehradun, which is flanked by the Ganga and the Jamuna, but basically most of us in North India, at least, we are from the I live on the banks of the Beas now in Kulu. I've got the Sutlej right next to me. I've got the Chenab right across. I've got the Ravi on the way. Actually, the cusp of the whole thing. So I kind of, but the name came up not because of all that. Nothing as serious as that. I was discussing it with Mr. Krishna Kumar Kandit, whose book also is shortly coming out. Pankaj is again, BluOne is publishing it. All Street Dogs Go to Heaven. He taught me English. We were discussing the title. The original title was 6 Degrees of Separation, because I find a lot of things are interrelated. And Hindustani came up as one of those discussions, and the name kind of stuck, so went with it. For me, the word Hindustani actually means non-political. Apolitical is a better word, perhaps, and secular in every way. It's basically the philosophy of the army. I mean, it's like that's how the army is. It doesn't see anybody in any. So that's how the name came, and it's kind of stuck. Generally, we get this kind of awkward silence when we're talking to class 7 kids in school. So, General Puri, sir, would you like to say something? You were commanding it. He was commanding 8 division during the Kargil War, and he is the man who you all heard of Tololing, you all heard of Tiger Hill, you all heard of everything. Well, here's the gentleman who's actually done it for the country.
Yeah, thank you, Kunal. Firstly, my compliments for a book which is very readable, like the General said. I've gone through it line by line, word by word, page by page, and I found it most interesting, very absorbing, and very gripping. Well done. I think it's a lovely book, which is maybe a collector's item in times to come. Now, we were speaking about a number of issues which came up, and General VK's experience in the valley. I also spent a year in Sharifabad, commanding 8 Mountain Division, before they got inducted into Kargil. Now, I think we have to understand, like what the General said, what a Kashmiri is. He's a person who sees power as a power is. I'll give you an incident or an instance from the time when the Kargil war started. The media was full, the local media was full of praise for the Pakistanis, the way they had come and surprised us, and how the Indian aggressors were being taught a lesson. The day we captured Tololing, and the day we captured point 5140, the complexion of the media changed. And then they were singing our praises, saying nothing like the Indian army and, words to that effect. So they do see power in its real form. And you can't blame them, because the history shows the type of, people who've ruled that state. They have to be sitting on the fence. They've had the Dogras, they've had the Sikhs, they've had the Afghans, they've had the Mughals, they've had the British, everyone. So they have to have their, I think, as we said, they have to be fence sitters. And there's nothing wrong with that, as long as it's in their own interest. Kargil was a wonderful experience. There are a lot of lessons which I'm sure people in service today have absorbed and have taken cognizance of where we went wrong. We failed in the intelligence line militarily and as a nation. It was a big setback initially, but then we got our act together, and 3 Division and 8 Division both did an excellent work. And we finally restored the sanctity of the line of control and brought honor and dignity back to the country and the army. Thank you, Kunal.
One other person I'm going to ask to say something is Mr. Darshan Singh. He is also not only the son of a general, but also the grandson of an army officer. His 2 generations went to RMC, which was first grandfather was Imperial Cadet Corps. I'm sure he'll correct me on that. But he's been as instrumental in taking this entire thing to taking military history to the country, in a manner of speaking. Though it's a small step in Vellum Boys, but sir, your comments, please.
Thank you. And once again, as has been said by others, I think, of course, your book is a great product that you've. Yet another book, let's put it like that. Whatever I know of Kunal is that he's an extremely hardworking person. He has a phenomenal memory. He remembers events, incidents, and he can even remember the fellow pulled out a cigarette, lit it before he spoke to me. So he has a tremendous memory, and of course he is an author, so he has to make it into an interesting anecdote. But what I want to say is he's very hardworking. He has not done just this book, he's done many others, and even 62 and 65. And so he's done more than one book, and he has tremendous knowledge, and he has obviously got to know a large number of eminent generals, including General Puri. Yeah, my father's father was in the Imperial Cadet Corps, and my mother's father went to Sandhurst. So there was a fair amount of, and his brother was another general in the army, after whom you have Brar Square and Brar Station and Brar Cantonment, whose son was your course 28th in the NDA, Tippi. So there has been a military background, and yet it is true that one day with Kunal we were talking about the fact that the Germans learned German military history. The French learned their French military history. And so the British learned their history. But we were also, when we were in school, we were also learning, unfortunately, the War of the Roses. Now it's not being taught, but when we were in school, my age group was learning British, wars and things. So even today, military history, that is the valor of our armed forces, what our armed forces have done for our country, which should be known by our children, our future generation of Indians, future leaders of India, who should know about their history. As you said, they don't know about the Northeast and people don't take interest. So this is a small step, but I think this is something that it's for the powers that be to realize that not only should we know about the Indian armed forces, but we should know more about the Chandragupta Maurya Empire, the Maurya Empire, the Gupta Empire, and not only know about the Mughals. Today, the average person only knows about Mughal history. So there is a gap, and it's for the people in government who can set the CBSE syllabus to include this, if not as a mandatory subject, at least out of the 126 subjects that are available under CBSE, at least this could be one of the optional subjects. Today, we don't even have Indian military history as an optional subject in this country. So that way, I feel we have made a small contribution. And I'm happy that Vellum Boys School could do this and call other schools. And I know that children who come from other schools are very motivated. A great national fervor comes up. And I think there was one girl who I think asked in the first seminar, General VK Singh. She was from the Army Public School in Dholak, and she asked General VK Singh, "Sir, tell me, why is it that only boys can die for India? Why can't girls die for India?" And he had a tough time answering that question. He answered it well. But I'm telling you how feelings run and how important it is to push this. And to that extent, congratulations to Kunal for putting it together, because though we give the platform, but he has the connections, the contacts, and the material that goes into all this. In the first seminar, we did say, and Kunal has pointed it out in his book, which I've read, we did say that the Chinese are not going to stop. And that was 6 years ago, and that is exactly what's happening. And I'm glad we could push it. The other thing we pushed is China talks of one China policy. Because for the last 180, 90 years, they've had Tibet and Xinjiang. But 300 years ago, half of China was part of Mongolia. The Mongols had conquered conquered China. So what if we have a one Mongol policy, then the whole of the one China policy goes. This is what we're teaching. We're telling people that this whole concept of one China policy is rubbish. But now it has to become a national subject. And anyway, thank you to all of you who attended. All 4 of you have attended the military history seminar. General Puri has come. And it's a great thing for the students to meet the general who commanded the Kargil operation. So I feel that we have given this platform has been good, but Kunal has put it together. Thank you, Kunal.
Thank you very much, sir. Anirudh, I think we should be wrapping up, but you'll hand over to you for your...
So, Kunal, before we wrap up, I just wanted to ask you a question to elaborate something that is already there in the book, but shared with the audience. It's also topical because we had this 8th December happening right next to, very close to Bumla. So this takes me back to the question of late General Ashok Kalyan Verma and his experience in 62. What happened there? And if you could share some of the insights that you have, which is not there anywhere in the print. So that'll be great before we wind up.
Okay. Well, 2 Rajput was my dad's battalion, and they were deployed actually at Walong. They moved from Sabatu when the things started to hot up with China in the late 1950s. And 2 Rajput was actually de-inducting from there. They had finished their 2 or 3 year tenure there, and they had handed over their defenses to 6 Kumaon. And they had actually moved by train close to Tezpur when the Dhola incident happened, and there was a lot of panic. And then 2 Rajputs was taken off the train and virtually in cotton clothes with no digging implements, with hardly any ammunition, they were pushed into Namkachu. And what happened there then subsequently literally defined India's military history in many ways, because it was the lowest point in our history when you look at all the actions that have happened. I mean, 62 was an unmitigated disaster for various reasons. The men fought. They fought as well as they could. And our battalion lost 282 men in a space of 2 hours of fighting. And if you compare that with the casualties in Kargil, you'll get it. Just to put it in perspective, over 50 days, we lost about 500 men, 540, whatever the figure was. So the intensity of what actually happened, it completely scarred us as a family. I was 2 years old. In fact, my mother was the only lady in that sector. The battalion rear used to be at a place called Teju, which was only twin otters used to fly across to Tawang, where the battalion was. So, in fact, when we got there, Chakoman Gohai was later a member of parliament, and he was the Kamti Raja. And he became quite pally with my dad because they had gone buffalo shooting on those islands in the Lohit River. So he built a house for my dad, for my mom, and for me. I was too small, 3 months, whatever. My mom never forgave my dad because she said, first we crossed the Brahmaputra by ferry, and then we had to cross the Digaru River. And that time 2 Assam rifles used to be posted in that area. So there was this elephant, and my dad sitting in front behind the Mahut holding me. And according to my mother, she was holding the elephant's tail and swimming along behind. So she said, she had a lot to say about it for years. I later met Chakoman Gohai. When I was shooting Project Tiger, his son suddenly appeared one day in this whole thing. And I went across to his house. They became very close friends, his whole family, over the years. Basically, everything in the book, it comes down to 2 things, as far as I'm concerned. One is literally having inherited the ability to... My father was always pushing me. My mother was always pushing me. Like, what is this bird? What is this tree? What is this? And sometimes I used to hate going for a walk with my dad because he'd stop and say, what is this tree? He himself didn't know which tree it was or which bird it was, but he expected me to know. And I only cottoned on to it after a long time that he actually has no clue which bird is this. So I could actually bullshit and get away with it. But in the beginning, I should honestly try and. But gradually, that literally, I think, defines the book also in many ways, because it's one thing I've learned, and I think even the Doon School played a very, very major role, because we had some absolutely incredible masters like Mr. Gurdial Singh and Hardy Singh. And, I mean, they were people which completely influenced us in so many ways. I would be smuggled out by some of the masters to go on murgi shoots with them to Kalesar. Why? Because I was a good gun dog. Yeah. And if they shoot down a murgi, Kunal, I used to be called Fauji. Send Fauji, he'll find the murgi. So I, like a Labrador, I'd go looking for it. Only thing missing was the tail. But it was such fun. And it just sort of continued in adult life also. And I think I've been very fortunate to have parents who literally put me there. My dad himself wrote Rivers of Silence, which documented the Namkhachu story initially. He survived the war because he got posted out. He went as a platoon commander to IMA. And in fact, the 62 book starts with what happened there. For us as a family, it was, everybody had died. I was 2 years old, but I can still feel the pain. I mean, it never left us. My dad was later in the cabinet secretary in 1980, I think 18 years afterwards. And we were going up in this lift. We were in SP Mark. And there was a liftman there who had a pronounced limp. And my father sort of looked at him. And recognition wasn't instant. For at least a week or so, this guy used to be there. And every time my father would fall silent when we were in the lift, he keeps staring at this guy. And after a week or so, he asked him, he says, "Aap do Rajput ke ho kya?" And what followed was, I was just in college that time, and they literally fell into each other's arms. It was crazy stuff. That you realize, what kind of a bond existed. And one was I mean, if I had to make a wish, they say, okay, this is your last moment on earth, what is your wish? I just wish I was born in an army family all over again. It just gives you the platform you want. Then it's up to you if you want to take it up or want to take it forward. Anyway, thank you very much, everybody, for being here. And yeah, sure.
How do you compare the situation in Punjab right now? Because drone trafficking of arms, drugs, and money are flowing in Punjab, and the killings are going on currently, with in the context of the 1980s.
You got the question, right?
Yeah.
The comparisons are difficult. It is not the same. Today the situation is totally different. Today the means of communication are different. Today the drug inflow is different. And a lot of things we are seeing, it may be shrouded in some philosophical or something which is wrapped in religious and politics. But I think the underlines are different. And it is different because people in Punjab have developed certain amount of despondency in the type of governance that they have seen. And till the time the governance doesn't become okay, things will never become okay.
Just to add to that, having been very much a part of what was happening in Punjab in 84, since your question is specific to that, I don't think there's any comparison. Things can never get as bad and as low as they did in 1984. I mean, things were terrible. Things were happening, as I earlier said, almost a thrill a minute kind of a thing. I mean, it was... and that time we didn't have social media, we had nothing of the sort, and yet there was so much happening. And just to add one point to what General Singh is saying is that, look, I've operated with these guys. I've been with them. They're great fun to be with, okay? I mean, that's the funny part. They may be terrorists, they may be whatever, but while you're there, they're just youngsters. And they know that sooner or later the police is going to get them. Their days on this planet are numbered. So they are out to have a great time. I've said this on so many forums. I have not yet met a guy who was driven because of religion or had any kind of ideology which we attribute to all these movements. It is just an economic thing. So you have a weapon, you have a government which is not capable of stopping you, you become the government. People, imagine a 21-year-old and somebody comes to them and says, "Ye meri voti no wo bhaga ke le gaya," and you lord it over the guy who haath kaat do. I mean, you're like God. And where's that power coming from? The barrel of a weapon, because there's nobody there to question you. Once that got sorted out in Punjab, Punjab's got major problems today. It's a very recognized issue. We have to be very, very careful because it's a frontline state. Things can go out of hand very fast. You've also got a lot of external influences, like countries like Canada and all. There's a major, the Khalistan thing is constantly being needled and wheedled from that end. But we've got to be a bit mature and handle it whichever way we can. And one of the biggest problems is that, as General V.K. Singh said, Punjab has had a governance which has been playing a kind of a political game. I mean, let's not forget that even 84 kind of bubbled up because political parties were playing games. Otherwise, it wouldn't have happened. At least not to the extent that it did. So I think we don't want to overshoot time too much. We already have. Sir, thank you so much for being here. Anirudh, would you like to just say something before we wrap up?
Just that it's been a wonderful experience working with you, Kunal. I had read your book, 1962, 6 years before we even met. So so I knew that it probably, from my perspective, I mean, others may disagree, that from all the books that I read on 62, and I read about 11 or 12 so far, almost every book that has been written on 62, and one in Hindi also, I have read. And your book, and when it came in 2016, answered an enormous amount of questions, which most of the books didn't at that point of time. So it's been wonderful working with you, and look forward to working with you even more. And thank you everybody for coming on this cold winter night. Thank you so much.